The wind howled through the trees that night, whistling past the corners of the house like a warning. I stood on the porch, clutching a small duffel bag, my breath visible in the freezing air. Snow was falling gently, but nothing about the night felt soft. Behind me, the living room glowed with warm yellow light, and the scent of cinnamon and roasted ham lingered in the air. It was Christmas Eve. Inside, they laughed. I had just given them their gifts. A scarf I knitted for Mom with trembling hands. A $10 watch I saved for by skipping meals. I wanted the moment to feel like family, like maybe I still belonged. But it didn't last. You really thought this would make up for everything? Mom said, her voice sharp enough to cut through bone. She held the scarf up with two fingers like it was something she found in the trash. Do you think we need your pity gifts? Dad scoffed from his seat at the head of the table. You've been living here for free, Emily, doing nothing, eating our food. We were proud of you once, but now you're a burden. The room went quiet. The clinking of silverware stopped. Even Nathan, my younger brother, froze. He looked at me, mouth slightly open. I could see the guilt in his eyes, but he said nothing. I opened my mouth to speak. I wanted to say I was trying, that my prosthetic leg still ached every time I walked, that I had applied to 3 jobs in the last week, that I still had nightmares from the war, but the words wouldn't come. You heard your father, Mom continued. If you can't pull your weight, it's time to go. My legs didn't move at first. I just stood there staring at the people who used to be my family. My pulse roared in my ears like the wind outside. Then I turned and walked toward the front door. Nathan followed me to the hallway, his voice low. Emily, wait. I stopped, looked at him. I wanted to tell him it was okay, that I didn't blame him. Instead, I just shook my head and opened the door. The cold hit me like a slap. I stepped out into the night, the snow crunching under my boots. I didn't cry. My bag was light, only a few clothes, my discharge papers, and a photo of me and Nathan as kids. I had nowhere to go. But as I stood there under the falling snow, one name came to mind. Grandpa Walter. He lived alone in the countryside. A bee farm, if I remembered correctly. We hadn't spoken in years. Still, I pulled out my phone, fingers trembling, and sent a single message. Grandpa, it's Emily. I need a place to stay. His reply came within seconds. Come on home, honey. The door is always open. And just like that, I started walking. Away from the house. Away from them. Toward something I didn't yet understand. But it had to be better than this. My name is Emily Sanders. I am 34 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that duty meant love. That if I gave enough my time, my energy, my money, my family would give back. I was wrong. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside of Portland. Our house sat at the edge of Maplewood Lane, a white 2-story home with green shutters and a porch swing that creaked with every gust of wind. In the fall, leaves would gather in colorful piles at the curb, and I used to rake them up while my mother stood on the porch barking at me to hurry. My mother, Helen Sanders, was the kind of woman who dressed like she was always heading to a garden party. Floral dresses, red lipstick, manicured nails even when there was nothing to do but sit in the living room. She wasn't cruel outright, but her words had sharp edges, and she often used them on me. Criticism was her form of communication. If I brought home an A-, she asked why it wasn't an A+. My father, Richard Sanders, was a bank manager. Tall, lean, a man of discipline. But unlike the warmth one might expect from a father, he carried a chill with him. He didn't raise his voice often, but when he did, it left a mark. He believed in control, in presentation, in things looking good from the outside. Inside, though, things were always cracking. And then there was Nathan, my younger brother by 4 years. He was quiet and kind, with wide, green eyes, and a mop of dark hair that never quite stayed combed. From the time he was little, Nathan clung to me. I was his protector, his role model, his big sis who could fix anything. He once said I was his hero. That memory used to make me proud. Now it makes my chest ache. We weren't poor, not exactly. But my parents lived as though money was endless. They leased new cars every 2 years, redecorated the house regularly, and threw dinner parties for people they barely knew. Meanwhile, they never talked about savings or college funds. Every expense was justified with the same phrase, "We deserve it." I learned early to carry responsibility. I did the dishes, cleaned the garage, helped Nathan with homework. I never complained. It was just what needed to be done. By 17, I realized I couldn't stay there. I needed out. And not just out of the house, I needed purpose, something bigger than small talk and appearances. So I walked into a recruitment center and enlisted in the United States Army. When I told my parents, they didn't react. No tears, no pride, just a nod from Dad and a distracted, "That's probably for the best," from Mom. Nathan was the only one who hugged me tight, whispering, "Don't let them change you." I didn't know what I was stepping into, but I was sure of one thing. I was going to make something of myself. Not for applause, not for medals, but to build a life of my own, and maybe, just maybe, give Nathan the chance at a better one too. Boot camp was brutal. I came home from runs with my lungs on fire, feet blistered, and every muscle in my body aching. But I never gave up. I grew stronger, faster, more focused. The military taught me discipline, but it also taught me how to endure physically, mentally, emotionally. When I was stationed overseas, I sent money home. Every paycheck, I carved out what I could for Mom and Dad. I told myself it was helping, that it was for the good of the family, that it would buy Nathan textbooks, tuition, hope. They never thanked me. But Nathan did. His letters, always written in crooked, careful handwriting, told me how hard he was studying, how he wanted to make me proud. Those letters became my anchor. In those days, I believed that love meant sacrifice. I didn't realize then how easily people can take and take until there's nothing left of you. But I would learn. I would learn it the hard way. The years in the Army passed quickly, though they felt endless while I was living them. I served 3 tours overseas, mostly in hot, dusty places where the sky was a dull white and the ground felt like it could swallow you whole. I lost friends. I lost sleep. I lost a version of myself I would never quite get back. But I also gained something: clarity. I learned what it meant to push past limits, to carry others when they couldn't walk, to stay alert, even when every cell in my body screamed for rest. I learned how to lead, how to listen, and how to survive. I also learned how far I would go for the people I loved. Every month, like clockwork, I sent money home. I wasn't making much, but it was enough to help with groceries, utilities, whatever bills they claimed they couldn't cover. The phone calls from Mom came often and were always tinged with guilt and pressure. The car broke down, Emily. "It's going to cost a fortune. Your father's not feeling well. We need to take him to a private clinic. Nathan needs a new laptop for school." I never said no. I tightened my own budget. I skipped haircuts, lived on the bare minimum, and wired most of my paycheck back home. I thought I was doing what a good daughter did, what a big sister should do. I told myself it would all be worth it when Nathan graduated, when Mom and Dad got back on their feet, when we could finally be a family that wasn't just surviving, but thriving. Then something shifted. Mom stopped asking for essentials and started mentioning luxuries. "We're thinking of flying to Vegas for the weekend. Just a quick getaway. Your dad wants a new TV. The one we have is fine, but the neighbors just bought this gorgeous 72-inch. Oh, and we might renovate the kitchen. It's outdated." I bit my tongue more times than I can count. I wanted to scream, to ask how they could justify this when Nathan was still working part-time just to pay for his textbooks. But I didn't. I kept sending the money. I visited home once during a short leave between deployments. I hadn't seen them in almost 2 years. I walked through the front door and stopped cold. There it was, gleaming in the driveway, a brand new luxury SUV. The house looked different too: fresh paint, new furniture, a chandelier in the dining room. Surprise, Mom said, as if I were supposed to be thrilled. We've made some upgrades. I remember standing in the hallway, still in my uniform boots, dusty from the road, feeling like I didn't belong, like I was the outsider in my own house. Where's Nathan? I asked. Out working, Dad said, barely glancing at me. He got a job at the sandwich shop down the road. Good for him to learn responsibility. I clenched my fists. So he's working minimum wage to buy his books while you bought a car? Dad looked at me like I had offended him. It's not your place to question how we live, Emily. You're the one who chose the army. We didn't ask you to do that. No, I said, my voice shaking, but you didn't stop me either. And you certainly didn't say thank you when I sent you every cent I had. Mom turned away, muttering, "This again." That night, Nathan came home late. He hugged me tight and apologized, not for anything he'd done, but for what I had to put up with. "I'm so sorry, Em," he whispered. "I know what they're doing. I know it's not right." I hugged him back, and I tried to believe that was enough, that maybe just his understanding could patch the hole in my heart. But something cracked in me that night, the kind of crack you don't notice at first until years later when everything finally breaks apart. After that visit, I returned to duty, but things weren't the same. The weight I carried no longer came just from my gear or the mission. It came from home, from betrayal, from a gnawing feeling that I was giving everything and being left with nothing. Then came the mission that changed everything. I was 28. We were tasked with escorting a convoy through a narrow mountain pass in a region known for insurgent activity. We had intel, of course, and protocols, and we were careful. But war is never predictable. I remember the heat, the smell of dust and metal. Maria was beside me, my best friend in the unit, the kind of woman who laughed loudly, swore freely, and made terrible coffee every morning. We were joking about a letter she got from her little brother when it happened. A deafening explosion. Everything flipped. Screams, fire, smoke. I remember grabbing Maria, pulling her out of the wrecked vehicle, only to realize she wasn't moving. Her eyes were open, but empty. I screamed her name, shook her shoulders. Nothing. Pain shot through my leg. I didn't know it at the time, but shrapnel had torn through the lower half of my right leg. By the time the medics got to me, I was half conscious, soaked in blood and dust. I woke up in a military hospital 2 days later. The doctor told me gently that they couldn't save my leg, that I'd be fitted with a prosthetic and discharged from duty. His voice was calm, but I didn't feel calm. I felt empty, not just because of my injury, but because I knew what I was going home to. And it wasn't a family. It was a house full of people who saw me as a bank account. And now that the money would stop, I wasn't sure if I'd be welcome at all. Returning home wasn't what I imagined. I'd pictured something small, maybe a hug, maybe just the quiet relief of being back on familiar ground. I didn't expect balloons or a party, but I did expect warmth. I expected to feel like I belonged. Instead, the welcome I received was scripted and brief. Nathan picked me up at the airport. He stood at the gate with a nervous smile, and when he saw me walking awkwardly, unsteadily on my new prosthetic, his eyes welled with tears. "Emily," he whispered, pulling me into a hug. "I missed you so much." I tried to smile. "I missed you too, kid." We drove home in silence for most of the ride. He asked about my leg, about the base hospital, about Maria. I gave short answers, not because I didn't trust him, but because the words were too heavy to lift just yet. When we pulled into the driveway, I froze. The house was different. Again. New curtains, new siding, a new car in the garage. It looked untouched by time, untouched by struggle. A strange contrast to the hollow ache that pulsed in my chest. Mom opened the door, clapping her hands like she was greeting a guest at a dinner party. "There she is," she exclaimed. "Our war hero." She hugged me tightly, but it felt stiff, like a performance. Dad stood behind her, arms crossed, nodding once. "Good to see you, Emily." His eyes were cool, calculating. They had cleared out the downstairs guest room for me since I couldn't manage the stairs yet. There was a twin bed with stiff sheets, a nightstand, and a chair that creaked when I sat down. It wasn't much, but I appreciated the gesture at first. The first few weeks went by in a blur. Mom made soup. Dad told stories about the neighborhood. Nathan helped me stretch, walked with me around the block when I needed to relearn my balance. And for a short time, I almost believed we had turned a page. But reality has sharp edges, and soon enough they began to cut. It started with comments. "You've been sleeping a lot, haven't you?" Mom said one morning as I limped into the kitchen. "You're always inside," Dad added. "You could at least be folding laundry." I tried. I helped with dishes. I swept the floor. I even signed up for a job as a night shift security guard at a supermarket nearby. But the PTSD didn't care about my good intentions. The job lasted exactly 9 days. It was a fireworks show, a harmless community celebration in the parking lot. To everyone else, it was music and lights. To me, it was war all over again. I hit the floor, covered my ears. My breathing turned to gasps. I saw Maria, the explosion. I couldn't move. The next day, they fired me. When I told Dad, hoping for at least a sliver of sympathy, he smirked. "You were a soldier, and now you're scared of fireworks." That one sentence shattered something in me. I had given them my strength, my health, my future, and now that I was broken, they treated me like a defective product. Still, I tried to hold on. I told myself they didn't understand, that they were scared too, that they just didn't know how to help me. But then came Christmas Eve. I had saved every dollar from my small military pension that month. Skipped lunch, skipped medicine, just to buy them something real. I gave Mom a scarf I knit by hand, each loop pulled through with shaky fingers and hope. I gave Dad a cheap watch I found online, the kind that looked more expensive than it was. I wrapped them carefully. I wrote their names in cursive. When they opened the gifts, I waited not for thanks but for a smile, a look of recognition. Instead, Mom held the scarf up with 2 fingers as if it were stained. "Seriously, Emily, you think this makes up for everything?" I blinked. "What do you mean? You've been mooching off us for months," she snapped. "You don't work. You don't help." And now this Dad didn't look up. He just said it flat and cold. "You're a burden. Get out of my house." The room fell silent. Nathan looked at me, eyes wide with panic, but didn't speak. I saw his lips part, then close. He was always the quiet one. He'd spent years tiptoeing around them. And I didn't blame him. I stood. My leg wobbled slightly. I didn't reach for support. I reached for my bag, which I had packed days earlier just in case. I looked around the room. I looked at the people I once fought for, people I had believed were worth sacrificing everything for. And then I walked to the door. Nathan followed, whispering, "Emily, please just wait." I turned, placed a hand on his shoulder, and gave him a weak smile. "It's okay," I said. "I'm not angry, just tired." Then I stepped out into the cold. The snow had started again. Gentle, soft, silent. The porch light clicked off behind me. I walked down the street alone, the prosthetic leg clicking softly beneath me, echoing into the night. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just walked. And when I reached the bus stop at the edge of the neighborhood, I pulled out my phone and texted one person. "Grandpa, it's Emily. I need a place to stay." He replied within minutes. "Come on home, honey. The door is open." And so I went. The bus ride to Grandpa Walter's farm was long and quiet. It moved slowly through the rural outskirts of Oregon, past frozen fields and pine trees draped in snow. I sat by the window, my duffel bag on the floor between my feet, my prosthetic leg stiff and sore from the cold. I hadn't seen Grandpa Walter in years. My parents kept their distance from him, always saying he was strange, that he wasted his life playing with bees and dirt. But I remembered him differently. When I was a little girl, he used to bring jars of golden honey to the house during the holidays. He never said much, but when he hugged me, it felt like something real, solid, warm. As the bus pulled up to a tiny rural station, a wooden bench, and a rusted sign, I saw him waiting near an old pickup truck leaning on his cane. He looked thinner than I remembered. His hair was all white now, his face deeply lined. But when he spotted me through the window, he smiled wide. Not the kind of smile people force to be polite, but the kind that said, "I'm glad you're here." I stepped off the bus slowly. My leg was stiff and I tried to hide the limp. He didn't flinch when he saw it. He didn't offer pity or awkward comments. He just opened his arms. "Emily," he said, his voice still strong but softer with age. "You've come home." I hugged him awkwardly with the bag over one shoulder and the snow falling lightly around us. He didn't ask questions. He didn't press for explanations. He just picked up my bag, tossed it in the back of the truck, and said, "Let's get you warm." The drive to the farm was peaceful. I rolled the window down slightly and breathed in the crisp air, pine needles, distant smoke from someone's fireplace. It smelled like quiet, like rest, like something I had been chasing for years but never found. The bee farm wasn't big. It sat on a wide piece of land surrounded by tall trees. The house was wooden modest with a wraparound porch and a dozen rocking chairs that looked handmade. Off to one side stood rows of white beehives, each one labeled and carefully spaced. Bees buzzed faintly in the cold air even in winter. Grandpa parked the truck and helped me inside. "I've got soup on the stove and the guest room all cleaned up," he said. "It's not fancy, but it's home." That first night, I barely slept. Not because of nightmares, though they still lurked somewhere in the corners of my mind, but because the silence was unfamiliar. There were no car alarms, no raised voices, no footsteps in the hallway that made me flinch. Just wind in the trees, a dog barking somewhere far off, and the occasional hum of a heater turning on. In the morning, I found a mug of hot tea waiting outside my door. Chamomile. No note, but I knew it was from him. At breakfast, we sat at a small table with chipped corners and mismatched chairs. He poured honey into his oatmeal and asked me nothing about the war. Instead, he said, "Did you know bees sleep holding each other's legs?" I blinked. "No, they do. In little clusters. Keeps the warmth in." I didn't know how to respond, so I just smiled a little. He handed me a jar of honey. It was thick, amber-colored, glowing slightly in the morning light. "That's from Hive 7, he said. "They've got personality, that group. Stubborn, a little wild." I ran my fingers over the label. It was handwritten in pencil. Later that day, he showed me the hives. Despite the cold, he insisted it was important I meet the bees. "They're good company," he said. "Better than most people." I stood beside him, bundled in an old coat he loaned me, watching as a few bees buzzed slowly in and out of their boxes. "How long have you been doing this?" I asked. "Since your grandmother died," he replied. "I needed something to take care of. Something small and alive. Something that depends on me." There was no sadness in his voice. Just honesty. We didn't say much else that day. We walked among the hives. I watched him check on a few of them, carefully lifting the lids, his movements gentle and practiced. At one point, he looked over and said, "You don't have to tell me anything, Emily. You're safe here. Whatever happened before, let it rest." I swallowed hard. My throat ached from holding back. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded, then turned back to the bees. And in that moment, under the pale gray sky, surrounded by quiet and hums, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Safe. The days at the bee farm passed slowly, like honey dripping from a spoon. And for once, I didn't mind. Each morning began with quiet, the kind of quiet you feel in your bones. No honking cars, no phone buzzing with demands, just the hum of the bees, the whisper of wind in the pines, and Grandpa's old radio playing jazz from a station barely hanging onto its frequency. I woke early and helped with what I could. At first, I moved awkwardly uncertain on my prosthetic leg, afraid of dropping things or scaring the bees. But Grandpa never rushed me. "They sense your mood," he said one morning as I held a smoker for the first time. "If you're nervous, they'll be nervous. Just breathe." So I did. I breathed deeply and slowly until the sound of my own breath matched the low, rhythmic buzz of the hives. I learned to open a box without disturbing the colony, to spot a healthy queen, to identify signs of a sick hive, and somewhere in the rhythm of that work, something inside me began to soften. The flashbacks didn't vanish. I still jolted awake some nights drenched in sweat, convinced I was back in that armored vehicle hearing the explosion, Maria's scream. But when I opened my door each morning, there was always a mug of hot tea waiting for me on the table outside. No questions, just a gesture that said, "You're not alone." One afternoon, while we were harvesting honey, Grandpa held up a full frame, golden and glistening. "Try filming this," he said. I blinked. "Filming? You've got that phone. People love to see this kind of thing." I hesitated. Social media felt like a different world, one I had no place in. But he was right. There was something mesmerizing about the way the honey caught the light, the calm hum of the bees around us. So I pulled out my phone and hit record. That night, I posted a short video on Instagram. No captions, no fancy filters. Just 30 seconds of honey dripping from the comb as bees wandered across the frame. I didn't expect anything. But the next morning, there were comments. "Beautiful. So peaceful. Where is this? I want to visit. I watched this 5 times. Thank you." It didn't go viral overnight. It wasn't a sudden explosion. But something started. A slow ripple. More people followed. Some messaged me privately saying they were struggling with anxiety or loss and that the video had brought them a moment of calm. So I posted another, then another. I showed Grandpa's hands carefully brushing bees away from a frame. I filmed the sunrise over the field, golden light spilling across the boxes. I recorded myself pouring honey into jars, the slow swirl like liquid gold. I didn't talk about my injury, or my PTSD, or my parents, not directly, but I told stories. About learning patience, about finding rhythm again, about the hum of life when everything else goes silent. People connected with it. One morning, I woke to find that one of our videos, Grandpa laughing as a bee landed on his nose, had been shared by a popular wellness account. Within hours, we had thousands of views, new followers, and dozens of requests to buy honey. I panicked. We weren't ready. We didn't even have proper labels or packaging. Grandpa, calm as always, just said, "Looks like it's time to get ready." We sat at the kitchen table that afternoon designing a simple logo. A tiny bee above the words, "Sanders Honey Farm." I handwrote our story, short and honest, and printed it on little cards to include with every jar. We started selling through Instagram DMs. Local pickup only at first. Then someone asked if we could ship. Then someone else offered to pay double for a large order. I watched as jars disappeared from our shelves, replaced with empty boxes and packing tape. It wasn't just about the honey. I realized that quickly. People were buying hope. They were buying a piece of stillness in a world that never stopped spinning. They were buying the sound of bees, the warmth of Grandpa's porch, the quiet strength of something that kept growing despite everything. And they were buying a little bit of me, though they didn't know it. The girl who had been called a burden. The veteran who had been told she wasn't enough. The daughter who had been left behind. I started receiving messages from other veterans, from people with PTSD, from women trying to rebuild after being cast aside by their families. One message stood out. A woman from Arizona wrote, "Your videos feel like healing. I watch them when I can't sleep. Thank you for making me feel less alone." I cried reading that. Not out of sadness, out of recognition. Because for the first time in years, I felt like I had something to give that didn't require me to sacrifice myself. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was beginning to live. Grandpa watched it all with a quiet pride. He never said much, but I saw the way his eyes lit up every time I told him we had a new order. He even joked once, guess I'll have to start wearing makeup for the camera. The bee farm grew little by little. Not just in business, but in meaning, in purpose. And so did I. It was a late spring afternoon when the car appeared at the gate. I had been checking hive sensors bent over one of the newer colonies when I heard tires crunching on gravel. I turned slowly, brushing my hands on my jeans. A silver SUV, polished and spotless, rolled to a stop by the entrance. I knew that car. My stomach clenched before I even saw their faces. Mom stepped out first. Her floral dress fluttered in the breeze, and she wore heels entirely impractical for a farm. Her hair was perfectly styled. She smiled like this was a casual visit. Dad emerged next, still in one of his old suits, tie askew, expression unreadable. His salt and pepper hair had thinned since I'd last seen him. He looked older, but not smaller. My hands tightened around the hive tool I was holding. Behind me, Grandpa stood up from his stool on the porch. I hadn't noticed he was watching. He didn't say anything, not yet. Mom waved at me like nothing had happened. "Emily," she called. "You look..." Well, I didn't move, didn't speak. "We need to talk," she added. I could hear the buzz of the bees around me. Calm, focused, purposeful. The contrast between them and the people standing at the gate could not have been more stark. Dad took a few steps closer, adjusting his cufflinks like he was preparing for a business meeting. "We've been thinking a lot about the past," he said. "We realize we made some mistakes." Mom nodded along, her voice soft. "We want to reconnect. We saw your farm online. It's impressive." There it was. I could almost laugh. The real reason they were here. Not guilt, not reconciliation, recognition, visibility, success. Grandpa stepped down from the porch, walking slowly across the yard until he stood beside me. "Richard." "Helen," he said, voice low but steady. "You took my savings years ago. Lied about why. Left me out of your lives. And now you show up when Emily builds something of her own." Dad's jaw tightened. "That was a long time ago." "She's your daughter," Mom said quickly, her tone tilting toward guilt. "You don't just cut family off because of hard times." I finally spoke. "No," I said. "But you do when family cuts you first." Mom's face fell. Dad looked away. "I spent years sending you money." I continued, my voice calm. "When I was overseas, when I barely had enough for myself. I gave up my savings, my time, my health. And when I came back broken, you threw me out like trash." "You were angry," Mom began. "I was traumatized," I said louder now. "I was recovering from losing a leg, from watching my best friend die in front of me, from waking up every night in panic." They were silent. "You didn't ask how I was. You asked why I wasn't earning, why I wasn't contributing, as if I hadn't already given you everything." I paused, took a breath. "You said I was a burden, and maybe I was, but I needed a family, and you weren't one." Dad stepped forward again. "We made mistakes, but you can't hold on to anger forever." I smiled sadly. "I'm not angry anymore. I'm free." That stopped him. "I have people now," I said. "I have Grandpa. I have Nathan. I have the bees. I have peace. And I'm not letting you take that from me, not again." Mom's voice trembled. "Emily, we just want to be part of your life. Of this. What you've built." Grandpa stepped forward. "This isn't yours to be part of," he said. "This is hers. She built it. Not for approval, not for show, for healing. And for that, you don't qualify." Dad's eyes narrowed. "We're still her parents." "You were," I replied. "But family isn't just blood. It's the people who show up when you're broken, who stay." "You left me in the snow." The silence that followed was heavy. Mom's eyes welled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were real. She reached for my arm, but I stepped back. "Please," I said, "just go." Dad looked like he wanted to argue, but Grandpa placed a hand on my shoulder. And just like that, the fight left them. They turned slowly and walked back to the SUV. The engine started and the car reversed out of the driveway, the gravel crunching louder than before. They didn't say goodbye. I stood there for a long moment watching the dust settle. The sun was beginning to dip below the trees. The bees kept buzzing unfazed. "I'm proud of you," Grandpa said quietly. "I'm not proud," I answered. "I'm just relieved." He nodded. "That's enough." Later that night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea in my hands, watching the stars blink into the sky one by one. The weight in my chest had shifted. Not gone, but lighter. I thought about what they had said, about mistakes, about reconnecting. And I realized something. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need them to suffer or apologize or explain. I just needed distance. Boundaries. A life that belonged only to me. For the first time, I had that, and I wasn't going to give it away. A few days after my parents left, Nathan called. His voice was lighter than usual, almost excited. "I've got a week off," he said. "Can I come visit the farm?" I smiled without hesitation. "Of course. I've been waiting for you." He arrived that Friday afternoon carrying a duffel bag, a second-hand laptop, and a small stack of folders. He stepped out of the bus with the same nervous grin I remembered from our childhood. But there was something different now. More confidence. A quiet strength. He hugged me tight, lingering for a second longer than usual. "Emily," he said, "I'm sorry." I knew what he meant. Not just for what happened that Christmas Eve, but for every moment before and after when he had stayed silent. When he didn't step between me and them. When he chose to survive by staying quiet. "You're here now," I said. "That's all that matters." He stayed longer than a week. He stayed because, in his words, this place feels like something I never had before. Together, we worked. He helped me reorganize inventory, suggested small changes to the packaging, and even designed a new label for our honey jars, a clean, simple logo of a bee flying over rolling hills. "It should look like hope," he said. We expanded slowly, added beeswax lip balm and soap. Nathan had researched beeswax cosmetic products, and after a few experiments and a lot of failed batches, we finally got the formula right. Customers responded with warmth and encouragement. Orders came in from all over the country. Schools emailed us asking if they could bring students for field trips. Veterans reached out to ask about volunteering. One day, as we stood in the field watching the bees return to their hives at sunset, Nathan turned to me and said, "What if we turn this into more than a farm?" I laughed. "Isn't it already more than a farm?" "No," he said seriously. "I mean, an experience. Beekeeping classes, retreats, a place where people who've been broken can come and learn how to build something again." I looked at him stunned, because he had said it exactly right. That's what the farm had become for me. Not just a way to make a living, but a place to breathe, to feel safe, to grow back the parts of myself that I thought were lost forever. Grandpa listened quietly when we told him our ideas. Then he stood, stretched his back, and said, "You two better get to it then. The bees aren't going to wait around forever." And so we began again. Every morning I woke up with a sense of purpose, not because someone expected something from me, but because I wanted to be part of something that mattered. We launched a website. Nathan wrote most of the copy simple and honest. I shared stories sometimes through photos, sometimes in small journal entries. I still didn't talk about the war, not in detail, but I talked about healing, about finding strength in repetition, about what it meant to be gentle with yourself. People wrote back. One woman in her 60s told us she came to visit the farm's website every day just to feel calm. A man in recovery from addiction asked if he could volunteer for a few months just to be around the bees. A teenager with anxiety messaged me saying, "Your bees make me feel like I can breathe again." I didn't know how to respond at first, but eventually I just started saying thank you. Because that's what it felt like. A thank you to the land, to the bees, to Grandpa, to myself. The nightmares didn't vanish. I still woke up sometimes in a cold sweat, still heard explosions in the middle of quiet nights, still reached for a weapon that wasn't there, but I wasn't alone anymore. When the fear hit, I would step outside and stand in the field. The moonlight would shine over the hives and the cool air would press against my skin. I would breathe, listen, feel the hum of the world continue. And in those moments, I knew I was still here, still healing, still alive. And finally, for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. Autumn came early that year. The leaves around the farm turned golden and brittle, and the air smelled like wood smoke and honey. Tour groups still came by in small numbers, mostly retirees and families from nearby towns. Some just came to buy honey, but others stayed to listen to the bees, to the land, and sometimes to me. We had added a small wooden deck with benches out behind the hives. People sat there with hot tea jars of honey on the table and sometimes just listened to the wind move through the trees. Nathan led most of the beekeeping demos, his voice calm and patient. I watched him with quiet pride. He had grown into himself here, like me. Grandpa sat on the porch most afternoons, his old notebook always nearby. He had begun documenting hive behavior again in tiny, shaky handwriting. "Never too late to keep learning," he said one day when I asked him what he was writing. "Bees still have things to teach me." One evening, as the sun fell low and gold across the field, we sat together, me, Grandpa, and Nathan, eating bowls of hot stew and slices of crusty bread with honey. There was no music playing, no conversation either. Just the sound of spoons scraping bowls, the occasional laugh from someone out in the field, and the soft hum of insects finishing their work for the day. "I've been thinking," I said. Both Grandpa and Nathan looked at me, waiting. "I think I've forgiven them. No names needed." Grandpa didn't react. He just took a slow sip of his tea. Then he said, "That's good, Emily. Forgiveness isn't about them. It's about you not carrying it anymore." Nathan gave a small nod. "You don't owe them anything." "I know," I replied. "That's what makes it forgiveness. I let it go without needing anything in return." We sat in silence a little longer. The stars came out quiet and patient. Later that night, I received a message. From Mom. It was short, a few sentences. "I hope you're well. We miss you. We saw your farm in the paper. Maybe we could visit sometime." I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted revenge, but because I didn't feel the need to explain myself anymore. My silence was not an act of cruelty. It was peace. The next morning, I deleted the message and went out to the hives. Nathan was already there checking on Hive 14. One of the newer queens was thriving, and the bees were calm, strong, organized. He looked up and grinned. "Good timing. Want to see something beautiful?" He lifted a frame filled with capped honey golden light glowing through the comb like stained glass. I smiled. Always. That afternoon, a school bus pulled up. Children stepped out with wide eyes and louder voices. A teacher herded them gently toward the front porch where I met them with small jars of honey wrapped in cloth and twine. "Let's talk about bees," I said, and their eyes lit up. They listened, asked questions. Some reached out cautiously when Nathan guided them close to the hives. Others sat quietly sketching what they saw. At the end of the visit, a girl with glasses came up to me. She was maybe 10. "Shy. I want to be strong like you," she said. I bent down and looked her in the eye. "You already are," I said. "Just don't let anyone tell you you're not." That night after dinner, Grandpa handed me a wooden box. It was smooth and old with carvings of bees etched into the lid. "I made this back when you were a baby," he said. "Always meant to give it to someone who'd understand." Inside were papers, drawings of hives, notes about bee behavior, scribbled dreams for expanding the farm. At the bottom was a photo of Grandma smiling next to a row of hives holding a jar of honey. "She loved this place too," he said. "I think she'd be proud of what we've made it." I couldn't speak. I just reached across the table and took his hand. The farm continued to grow. Orders increased. We hired 2 new helpers, Sarah, a local college student studying agriculture, and Tom, a retired teacher who found joy in working with bees. We added a tiny coffee station near the front gate where visitors could sip honey-laced drinks while watching the fields. People didn't just come for the honey. They came for the story, the stillness, the reminder that healing doesn't have to be loud. One day, Nathan stood beside me watching a group of visitors walk back to their cars. He said, "You know you never talk about what happened back then." "I know," I said. "I don't need to anymore." He paused. "Do you think you'll ever tell the whole story? I looked out at the hives, the steady dance of bees." "Maybe," I said. "But the truth is, I already am. Every jar, every class, every quiet afternoon we give to someone else, it all tells the story." He nodded. And we stood there together, not speaking, just listening to the hum. That night, I wrote something in my notebook. I didn't post it, didn't share it. I just wrote it for me. I am not what I lost. I am what I built after. And I knew with quiet certainty that it was true. The seasons kept turning as they always do. Winter arrived gently that year. Frost coated the edges of the fields in delicate lace, and the bees slowed their movement, retreating into the warmth of the hives. Inside the house, we moved a little slower too. Mornings started with hot cider. Nights ended with quiet reading near the fireplace. Even the silence felt full. Coleman Honey, now Sanders Honey, and Farmstead had become more than a name. It was part of the community. We were featured in a few local magazines. A Portland radio show did a short segment on healing through nature, and someone from a veterans organization reached out about partnering for therapeutic retreats. At first, I hesitated. I didn't know if I was ready to become a face of anything. But Nathan reminded me of something I once said. "We're not selling honey. We're offering something steady in a world that breaks easy." So I agreed. We started small weekend visits for veterans with PTSD. No speeches, no counseling, just time, space, beehives, firewood, tea. People came from all over. They left with honey and sometimes lighter hearts. One afternoon, a man named Curtis, ex-Navy, stayed behind after a group tour. He stood near the hive fields, hands in his coat pockets, his eyes red. "I used to think healing was supposed to be a grand moment," he said. "A sunrise. A breakthrough. But maybe it's just this." He pointed to the bees. "They just keep going." I nodded. They don't look back. They don't demand apologies. They focus on what needs to be done day by day. He stayed another hour sipping tea with Grandpa and listening to old jazz on the porch. Later that night, I wrote his words down in my notebook. I'd begun filling it slowly, page by page, less about the bees, more about life. I called the notebook The Quiet Rebuild. One early morning, I woke before sunrise. The sky was a soft gray and the farm was blanketed in fog. I stepped out onto the porch with a blanket around my shoulders and a cup of coffee in my hands. Grandpa was already there, his breath fogging the cold air. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. "Too quiet." He chuckled. "Funny, huh? All we ever wanted when we were younger was peace and quiet. And now when we get it, we don't know what to do with it." I looked out across the field. The hive sat still, the bees tucked inside, warm and safe. "I think I'm finally okay," I said. He didn't answer, just nodded. A few days later, a package arrived at the gate. No name on the return label, just a box wrapped in brown paper. Inside were two things: a family photo, one of me as a child sitting between mom and dad, all of us smiling, and a letter. I didn't open the letter at first. I let it sit on the kitchen counter for 2 full days before I finally unfolded it. It was from my mother. She wrote that she was sorry, that she had been wrong, that she hoped I was happy, that she'd heard I was doing well, that she would understand if I never responded. I didn't. But I didn't feel rage or sadness, just distance. I placed the photo in a drawer and slid the letter beside it. Not out of spite, just because I didn't need it anymore. Forgiveness isn't about restoring old things. Sometimes it's about walking away from what broke you and planting something better in its place. Spring returned, as it always does. Bees buzzed louder. Flowers bloomed in wild colors. The farm filled with new visitors, new stories, new laughter. Nathan added picnic tables near the west field. Sarah launched a candle-making workshop with local crafters. Tom built a new storage shed with his bare hands and a stubborn smile. One day, as I stood watching a mother and daughter harvest honey together during a tour, I felt something settle inside me. Not closure. Something better. Belonging. Not to a house that asked me to leave. Not to a version of myself that lived only for others. But to this place. These people. This quiet hum of purpose. That evening, Grandpa raised a glass of cider over dinner and said, "To the ones who stayed." We clinked glasses, laughter floating through the window and into the bee fields. And later, as I stood on the porch under the stars, I listened not for silence, but for the hum. That soft, steady hum of bees working, of life going on, of healing that didn't arrive in grand gestures, but in small, patient moments. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. And I thought, this is my home. Not because I inherited it, not because I fought for it, but because I made it with my hands, my scars, my hope. And that was enough.